Thank you so much for being here today. This is part of our expert interview series, which aims to make these careers in the environmental field more accessible to youth and aims to increase their education on what these careers look like and what different things they might need to do in their high school and college careers in order to get into these fields. So we're super excited to start talking about biogeochemistry with you and inclusion in STEM. But we'll start off with a brief round of introductions. So, my name's Emma, and I'm the founder and executive director of Teddy.
My name is Matthew, and I'm the networking coordinator with Teddy.
I am Rebecca Barnes, and I'm currently a high school teacher at the Hotchkiss School, which is a private boarding school in Connecticut.
Great, thanks so much. So, we will jump right into it. The first question that we wanted to ask you was a little bit about why you decided to work in the environmental field and what exactly is biogeochemistry.
Yeah, well, I definitely when I was in high school, I had no idea what biogeochemistry was. I don't think I knew it was a word even. I'm trying to even think about when I learned it was even a term. Definitely, I don't even know if I knew what it was in college. I probably heard the term in college, but even when I was a geology major in college, to my knowledge, to my memory, I don't remember that term. So I really just sort of discovered what biogeochemistry was when I started doing it. But I but to rewind, I sort of was always really interested in the environment around me. I was one of those kids who would play outside all the time. I was I liked, I was I was a muddy kid. And so I really liked playing outside and stuff. And, I was asked a lot of questions of about the forest or, about why some trees look different and things like that. So, and, as I was in school, I always was sort of good at science. And so I think, when you're good at something, it's easier to like it. So I think it was helpful for me that I liked it. But when I went to when I went to college, I knew I wanted to do science, but I didn't know sort of what kind. I think I really wanted to do some sort of ecology type thing, and then and I actually ended up being a geology major in undergrad, which was at Oberlin College, and I just sort of loved how geology taught me how to sort of put all these pieces together of the landscape and recreate what had happened, not only over my lifetime, but billions of lifetimes. And I thought that was a really cool thing about geology. As I continued doing work and then decided to go back to school for graduate work and things like that, I was really interested in sort of understanding how humans were interacting with the environment and our impacts on the environment. And that was just something that was always really interesting to me. And one of the reasons I went back to school initially to do public policy work and thinking about how to be an informed decision maker. And so biogeochemistry just ended up it's the name of the thing that I was interested in, but I didn't know that was what I was interested in. So, I also like to joke that it's the type of science for those of us who don't like to make decisions, because we get to do a little bit of biology, a little bit of geology, and a little bit of chemistry. But what I usually say is that I essentially use geochemistry to answer ecological questions. And so what I really like about biogeochemistry is that it focuses on, for the most part, it's focusing on a few elements in the periodic table. As I tell my students at Hotchkiss, the New England of the periodic table. I'm studying, that upper right-hand quadrant, right? So nitrogen, carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, and these are elemental cycles that are critical to like every form of life on our planet, right? And including our own. And so by understanding these cycles, we can like really better understand how humans are interacting with the environment, both in a positive and negative way. And so like I sort of just fell into it because it was like, oh, I'm interested in studying like the intersection of people and the environment. But yeah, if you told me that I was someone who was going to like teach chemistry like later in life or like use chemistry in a fluent and fluid way later, I would have been like, your banana pants. Like that's not happening. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really
hopefully that answered your question. I went on a little too.
No, of course, and that really resonates with me personally because exactly what you said with like the biogeochemistry is for people who can't decide what they want to do or what field of science resonates with them, and that's exactly like I feel like what I'm doing right now too. I'm in a bunch of different STEM classes, and it's really, really interesting to see how they all connect and how it can apply to like real people in the real world. So it's great. That's amazing. I love hearing that. And I'm curious now what your day-to-day work schedule looks like. I know you mentioned that you're like a high school teacher, but I'm also wondering on the side of like working in inclusion and STEM and that kind of thing, like what do you typically do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, so I've had a lot of different jobs, and like my sort of scientific training as a biogeochemist, so I do have a PhD, and I ended up going to school forever, as my sister likes to say. So the extent to which that comes into my day-to-day life probably varies on a day-to-day basis, but definitely also with my job. So, right after I finished my PhD, I like only did research. So I was like exclusively doing science. And like, so my days and my life were much different than they are today, where I'm like starting a research program that is on biogeochemistry with students. So I think about biogeochemistry because of that. And I, without a doubt, like draw on that knowledge in my teaching. So I currently teach both chemistry and biology. And again, right, like not making decisions. So I can, like, I draw on those sort of my experiences as a scientist, like without a doubt when I'm like planning classes and examples, and we try to do as much inquiry-based learning as possible at Hotchkiss. So I'm not just lecturing to students. So just thinking about like real world examples and bringing chemistry and biology, like making it more active. So, I mean, right now my schedule is very, very different than it was even like 3 years ago, right? So, so right now my schedule, because I am teaching in, I teach 4 classes. So I teach 3 of them each day. And so my day typically involves, like planning and like prepping and, actually teaching the course, and then I have meetings every day. I do have meetings every day, right? So, in a high school setting, right, like a lot of us teach biology, right? There's often not just one biology teacher. So like the other biology teachers and I, like we all meet like once a week. And so that happens for each of my classes because I'm teaching, these like building block classes that everyone takes. So I have those meetings. We have department meetings to think about, course schedules for next year, departmental needs, like speakers, I don't know, we just had to like, there's all these administrative things, like we just had to rewrite all of our like course descriptions, right, to make them more similar, right? And it seems so mundane and these little things, but then you realize like how important all of these tiny tasks are and how they would take forever if you didn't all work together to get them done. And then, as a high school teacher, I also, like coach after school. So I currently like work with students on the farm here. So we have a school run farm. So I do that with the students about an hour and a half to 2 hours every day after classes. So classes start at 8:30 in the morning typically, and then most days go until about 3:30. And so, yeah, and then in the evening, I mean, grading and, you know, it's not like that exciting, but like designing things for like lessons for the next day. And then, like I was saying, I'm like currently, so it's right now it's spring break, and so Hotchkiss is actually starting a research program, and like this summer is our first summer of doing it. So I'm taking the students, and like, so we just selected them. So 14 students will spend like 2 weeks with me at Great Mountain Forest, which is basically like directly south of you, Emma, and south, I guess, east of you, Matthew, but in the northern part of Connecticut. And so it's a land trust. And there's been a lot of research there over the years. And so like my students will be like working there for 2 weeks, and we'll be like collecting data for their projects that they'll work on their senior year. And so right now, unlike on a day when I'm teaching, I'm actually spending a fair amount of time like thinking about sampling. And like today I'm trying to figure out if I can like move a drying oven to the like forest so that I can like, which like, can I physically move it? Yes. But like, can I move it based on like, you know, safety? Can it like, is the electricity there like okay for it, you know? But like trying to think about how to run a field program that hasn't been run before. So, you know, it's like we have housing, right? We have a place to stay there. We have, you know, all these other things, but there's all this like logistics that until I was a professor, and now I'm a teacher, but you know, until I was doing that, like I really hadn't thought about like the level of logistics that go into like field trips or, you know, any of those sorts of things. I don't know. It's sort of like I don't know if either of you went to summer camp, but like I remember when I transitioned from like being a camper to being a camp counselor, and you're like, oh, all of this magic takes a lot of effort, you know, and you're like never sleeping, and it's like still amazing, but like amazing in a different way than it was when you were a camper.
No, yeah, exactly. And I definitely can see that because I did some research in high school as well, and there was definitely a transition from like doing labs in my like chemistry classes and such, and then like I was enrolled in the science research program at my high school, which is cool because it seems like you're doing something similar where you work. But it's definitely a lot to plan out the logistics and like how everything's going to work, how you're going to collect, how you're going to sample. And I'm sure you have extensive experience with that from your own research as well. But I definitely feel you there.
It's like, but everyone needs like a degree in event planning,
Yes,
right? Like,
yes.
I mean, it's, yeah, all of those things. Like, it's like also thinking of all the things. Like, you're like, oh, hold on, what? Oh, right, I need to think about that too, you know? Like, all of that.
Yeah. So I think sort of like going off that question, what traits and experiences do you think an individual would need to work in this field, and what traits and experiences do you think aren't that emphasized when we talk about like going into this field? And something else that I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on is you mentioned being a researcher first and then sort of transitioning to teaching, and what different traits and experiences you think you sort of need to be a teacher and also to be a researcher?
Yeah, those are good questions. I think, so, I mean, like many things, there's some things that are completely in common. So I think something that makes you a good researcher and a good teacher is someone who's like really curious, and like likes to solve puzzles and like think about how to solve the puzzles, right? So if you want to do teaching, you also have to think about how to solve the puzzle in a more deliberate way than when you're just solving the puzzle, right? So, you know, it's like when you try to teach someone how to do something that you do really well, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about how to do this, you know? And there's like, whether it's because of weird muscle memory that you like literally can't describe how to do it, you know, which I have had that happen, or it's just because, you know, you've done it for so long that you like haven't broken the steps down in a long time, right? And like it's beyond you, right? So I would say that there are some things that are really similar and some things that are different. So I would say like being curious, having a lot of patience, being okay with being wrong, because I think that one of the things I believe most schools and like most education systems, and I think honestly for a lot of reasons, because it's easy, we like focus way too much on being right, you know, and being right is like once you're like asking questions that we don't know the answers to, like we don't know if we're right, you know, so we have to like understand how to think, how to like process that information, how you know, I mean, I feel like in the given AI and everything today, like is the AI telling you something that makes sense, right? Like, can you tell you if the computer is telling you the truth, right? I mean, I think that, you know, I mean, I'm almost 50 and right, comparing like when I went to college, like you couldn't Google things, right? So there's a big difference, but you know, it's just like the amount of information that's available makes it a sort of a different proposition, right? So we now have this ability to get all this information so quickly, right? And for most of my lifetime, that was not the case. And so being a scientist isn't just about like finding information, right? It's also about like asking those questions and like being patient with and sort of resilient in the sense that like, you know, you need to be able to figure out how to take in new information and like change your model if that's necessary, or when that new information is just new information, right? And like while it could imply that your model's wrong, it also could just, you know, just be new information, right? And so I think that process is really challenging for many of us because it's easy when things are right and wrong, right? Like if we can just like check a box or, you know, get a 97 on the test or, you know, what have you. But when it's about like, I remember this point in learning, like during my PhD, when I still was like running, I mean, proverbially, maybe occasionally, literally, but running to my advisor to be like, look, you know, and I like, at one point I was like, all of a sudden I realized that he didn't know what the data was going to tell him. Like he hadn't seen the data. It's not like there was an answer that he was waiting for me to bring him, you know? And that was this like slightly terrifying realization, but also a little freeing, you know, more terrifying to be honest than freeing, but to like be like, okay, you have to learn how to construct an argument and how to think through possible solutions. Because if you want to be a scientist or if you want to be in that space where we're thinking about and challenging what is true, right? We have to be able to decipher it ourselves, right? Like we like have to figure out a way to trust ourselves, you know, and also be okay with being wrong, right? I think one of the most important things that we should be doing in the classroom is, you know, and you sort of referenced this, Emma, like, you know, when you're doing like labs, right? At a certain, like, there is a lot of our education where it's like the teacher knows what is going to happen. And if you do not have that pink bubbly blah 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 at the end, you did it wrong, right? It's not about discovery for everyone, right? It's about like a carefully formulated plan, right, to hopefully get you and your peers to like make some observations that leads to discovery in your understanding of a phenomenon, right? And like that's awesome, right? But that, you know, that has like, it's science that we've done enough that we know that when you got a green bubbly whatever, you did it differently than what our directions had said, you know, while when you were doing research, we're like, oh, it's green, not pink. You know, like you don't know if it's right or wrong, right? And so I think to get to that point, I think for me, a lot of it was like building the sort of scientific confidence that I, like my thoughts about the data were valid, right? And I don't know if that makes sense, but that was hard to like be like, oh, actually, like I know the data better than someone has been doing this longer than me, and you know, whatever. Like they might bring insights to it, right? But that doesn't mean that they necessarily know my system better than me, you know? So I think, yeah, something with, but without a doubt, like it's probably good to be stubborn because like you're going to be told no a lot. But I think like most things, like patience, being curious, and having like the proverbial thick skin so that you can like handle being told no or just getting it wrong, right? I always tell my students, if you never get anything wrong, if you never feel uncomfortable in my class, like I haven't taught you anything. Because like if you're learning something, like at some point you're going to be like, what? I'm sorry, what? Like, what? Like, it's like changing the way you see the world, you know? And like, if we were actually capable of processing all of that information that was coming into our brains, like in classes, like our heads would be exploding, right? Because all of it is changing our knowledge about the world. So, I always tell them, I'm like, you should be proud of yourself if you got something wrong, because it means you tried. Right. And if you get everything right, it means that you're not challenging yourself. I always like students would like be like, oh gosh, I didn't know that. And I'd be like, oh, thank goodness, because someone's paying a lot of money for me to teach you something, like, you know, so I just think it's important to like stay curious.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned AI in your response. I was sort of wondering where you see AI going, specifically in the environmental field, the science field, but also in teaching in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have no idea is my honest answer. I have no idea because it's changed so much in such a short period of time. I don't think that AI is evil. I think that it can be used in efficient ways, right? But I sort of think of it as like any other tool, right? So just like, you know, you didn't get a calculator until you learned how to add on your own, right? And so I think that what we need to do is figure out how to teach the critical thinking skills so that we can use it as a tool that enables us to go further, whether that's with our education, our own research, our own thinking, right? So do the task. Like, yeah, I mean, like, for example, when I was in grad school, last century, which is true, but also makes it sound even longer ago, right? Like every journal article wasn't online, right? Like you had to go to the library. We would have these things called copy cards. Neither of you have ever had these things. And they literally, like you would put money on them and then you would have to pay like 5 cents a page or whatever for whatever copy. If you put like $10 on that copy card, you were losing it. Like you just knew that was happening, you know? And so like, but like the journals, right? Like obviously that also means that the journal has come in, it has then like gone to the shelf and you are then reading it. Like it did not come out last week, right? You're not reading any science that just came out, right? There's no like table of contents coming to your inbox. So one, there's a big delay in when you can read it and like find it and what have you. But yeah, I also just like, you will never have the joys or torture of like battling with the library copier to be like, I wonder if I can get both pages on one page so I can save money. And then you just decide that you're losing more money, like with the Zoom feature, and you should just go back to copying everything one by one. But yeah, I mean, it's like the fact that I can now like if I'm on the VPN for school, I can get like all these journals that are available like online is like truly amazing, right? I mean, I could look at stuff in grad school and I could like probably point to papers that I wrote with like last minute because everything I cite is from JSTOR, which was the only online resource. And like, you know, because it was too late and I couldn't go to the library, you know? So I think it's like more about like teaching us how to do things, you know, and how to use it. So one thing that's like really great, it's like helps me write code, you know, and like, do I think it's important for everyone to know how to write code who's a scientist? I'm not sure, but like, do I wish I could do it better? Yes. You know, and so, but like, you know, like even like the code that I write for statistical analysis for the most part and some modeling, you know, like in my scientific career, I've gone through like so many programs, right? And now they're free, which is awesome. They're like open source, but you know, for so long they weren't. So like every time you moved institutions, you have to learn a different proprietary blah, 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 you know? And so I think that I think there's a lot of good that can come from it, but I think that at least at the high school and college level, it's really challenging because, well, one, I don't think that any of us gain a lot from students using it to write their papers, right? Like it doesn't produce a very good paper, but it'll produce paper, right? Which if you didn't have a paper is better than like nothing, right? But I do think but if someone's like I speak basically one language and I can get around French speaking countries ish, right? But like I can't imagine like writing a scientific paper in another language, and that's what the vast majority of the world has to do because English is the language of science. Well, we don't have time to like depack all the colonial crap associated with that, right? But if like an AI tool helps someone write a draft of their paper in English as opposed to their like native language, like that seems like a great tool to like increase accessibility of science, increase like access to knowledge that we wouldn't have had, So, I mean, I do think there's lots of good things. It's just trying to figure out how, just like when like graphing calculators came out, like the teachers were like freaked out because we could like cheat because you could like store a whole bunch of stuff on there. I never figured out how to do that. But like, eventually they figure out like it's not like worth worrying about that, right? If they end up doing that, they're not learning, right? But it's really challenging to just acknowledge that like a student has to take charge of their own learning. If they want to quote unquote cheat the system, they probably will be able to figure that out, but they're probably like cheating, not to sound too much like a parent, cheating themselves as well, right? Like because they probably won't be learning it. No, but I am glad I don't teach in an English department. I feel like my colleagues in English it's challenging, right? Because like entire papers will get written.
Yeah, I know that here, I took an English class last semester, and my professor was literally just like, I don't want to, if I sit down and read your paper, I don't know if it's going to be a paper like written by AI or a paper written by you, and then you're almost doing like the professor a disservice if you submit something that like you didn't even write and it was just written by a bot. So there's definitely a lot of like discourse and conversation happening on campus right now in all the departments, even scientific departments, about when students should be allowed to use AI and when we shouldn't. And even in some of my classes, we've been crafting like AI use policies that this is what is okay to use it for and this is what it's not okay to use it for. And I find that very helpful because there's definitely some like benefits and also some drawbacks that you obviously mentioned. And also on your point about like translating scientific literature into like different languages, I actually just learned about this organization that was founded by a Williams alumni, who is working on this organization is working on translating, I think it's mostly environmental science literature into like languages that aren't English, which is interesting. Like they're going the opposite way to make these papers and articles more accessible to like people in like countries that don't speak English at all, which I think is very cool. And I think they are using AI as a tool in that. So you're definitely right on that point.
Yeah, I one of my many jobs in my life was I did this work with an international organization, and we were trying to facilitate. They still do, like facilitate research crossing boundaries, right? Crossing both like disciplinary boundaries, institutional boundaries, but then also country boundaries. And one of the things we were experimenting with was like, well, could we accept applications in a language other than English, right? It was a global organization, and so we were experimenting with an AI tool. And so, well, one, you have to like make sure that everything stays like within it. So it's not, right, like scientists aren't losing their IP, right? They're not like, it's not just going out into the world. And then, and then AI makes mistakes. So then it's like, well, like the scientist then gets the chance to like look at the translation, and then whether or not they have the resources to find someone to like read it in that other language or what have you. We like had all these like places where they could intervene, and then we had for like everyone, we like one person for any proposal not in English was like read by someone who understood that language and was an English speaker. So it was like, but it's like a lot of work to then make that possible.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it is, I mean, like, if you look at I don't even know, we could like Google it, like what fraction of the world speaks English, you know, it is not the majority, and by any stretch of the imagination, you know, and but that is, you know, it's like yet another like gate, right, to access information, right, is the English language.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that response. I want to shift gears a little bit to talking more about like your work in inclusion. So I wanted to ask if you personally like have faced any barriers or challenges like being a woman in STEM, or if you know other people who have like faced those challenges and how you or them have overcome those challenges.
I mean, yes, the answer is yes, 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 and yes, and yes. But I would say that like for a long time, I didn't even realize it, right? Like I didn't even realize that these biases were happening because it was just so common. And I think that you know, well, one, I went to so I became a geology major at Oberlin, and my cohort at Oberlin was dominated by women, and that was just sort of a weird thing, right? But like colleges often, and Oberlin's not different, and when I was there it was that way. It was like there was a few more women percentage wise than men on campus, but you know, like in the geosciences, like women are still only about like 30% of like trained PhD scientists who you know are working. And so like pretty quickly, once I started doing research, it became like more and more obvious that I was like the only one, right? Like the only woman in the room, or the only one of two women, or, you know, I'd often like speak and at conferences and be like literally the only woman in the room, you know? And so, but I mean, there's been like everything under the sun, right? Like some stuff that is like clearly awful and malicious, to other things where, you know, it's just people not recognizing that private conversations can make someone else uncomfortable, right? Like, for example, like I was always in a lab space, right? A lot of those lab spaces would have like Maxim calendars or, you know, something along those lines, right? Like not naked women, but like women that were being objectified, right? Like beautiful women, but like, you know, being objectified. And, you know, like I quite honestly didn't think anything of it, right? Like I just like they were there, but like I at one point I remember being like, that's really weird that they are even there. Like we're at a university, right? Like this is a lab space. Like this isn't, but that's what I mean by it was like so normal that like, or, you know, there's just like lots of comments, you know, like made about like whether it's like your strength or, you know, like, or how pretty you are or whatever, right? I mean, like just shit that comes out of people's mouths, like you would not believe it. I mean, the first time I presented at a conference, like it was like a poster, and this man who I have no idea who he was to this day, and he literally came up and like asked me for my spiel or whatever, and I was like a first year PhD student, and so I was like, you know, talking about stable isotopes and land use. I was like so excited someone was interested in my work, and like he leaves, and the only thing he says to me is, "You are way smarter than you look. You should consider dyeing your hair." And like, exactly, Emma, right? And like my PhD advisor was like not super far away from me, but like far enough away. Like he was like kind of hovering, you know, awkwardly. And like, I just remember looking at him and him looking at me being like, you know, like, what do you say? You know, I mean, it's just so, and like Pete, bless him, right? Like he just was like, what the F? Like, what is going on? Like, this is insane. And then, you know, and it just like always happens. And of course he hadn't dealt with that, you know, because not a woman. And, you know, and like so much of my experience, right? Like, this is just like what happens to like so many of my colleagues and I. And so, and it just is like, it's basically like the space was not built for us, right? Like oceanographic cruises, right? Like women weren't allowed on them until the 1970s, right? If like we can think about like, you know, Sally Ride being the first woman astronaut from the United States to go into space, right? And like these things, while they're before you two were born, you know, they're in my lifetime, right? And like that, or right, we just have the Oscars, we don't have to like exclude other like disciplines from this, right? Michael B. Jordan won, but I think he's like only the sixth Black man to like win an Academy Award for Best Actor, right? And so it's just, it's more than it takes time, right? It's like the systems in which we all live, right, were built by people who had power. And those people who had power historically have been, for the most part, white men. And so whether they built the systems to keep others out or like intentionally, or if that is just the benefit of their system, right? But they built it, right? So it's not like an accident. Right. So, we can look at the scientific enterprise as it is sort of conceived in this moment. And it's very much like a Western European colonial thing, right? And it's very extractive. We think about like taking information, we think of science and data in very prescriptive ways. That's changing, thankfully, now, where folks, are recognizing the importance of, all types of knowledge, right? Not just knowledge that's created in these like proverbial ivory towers, but also indigenous knowledge. And, it's not different. I mean, it's different and it's not, but like it's not less than, right? Like you can even look at, even if we like think about classic science examples, we can think about some of the best climate records aren't actual thermometer records. It's like from a winery in France that like has the records of their harvest, or we can look at like Thoreau's journals and see like what birds were living like in the part of the world that Emma and I live in right now, 100 200 years ago, like we can use a lot of different types of data. And I just mentioned like a white man, apologies, but there's a lot of people who record information that is data, right? And like Thoreau, I honestly don't know if he thought of himself as a scientist or not, but he was writing down observations, right? And I think that also points out, right, like how much we can gain just from like writing down our observations, which is like coming back to the AI thing. That's something that AI can't do, right? It can't see, and so, it can see an image if you load it in, but it can't look out into the natural world. Like you could feed it a picture, but then you have to tell it what to look for in that picture, right? All of it is algorithms. And so like, once you think about like, well, just like go through the thought process, like, okay, well, if I was going to build an AI and I wanted to analyze the landscape and I gave it a picture, what would I ask it to look at? Right. So it's like, go through that thought process and then, yeah, sure, have AI do it. Right. And then you'll be like, oh God, that's way less time than I thought, right? But I think, I just think that there's, I totally left the topic that you asked me to talk about, but I do think that like, what I work on is like informed by my life experiences, but I fully did not realize like that my life experience was like, for lack of a better phrase, colored by these actions that were so prevalent that like, I didn't even realize they were happening. If that makes sense, or that it had anything to do with like other than like bad luck on my part. But yeah, I think in general, if you talk to anyone, I honestly don't have friends in science who identify as women, or friends who identify as non-binary who have not experienced it. And I would say that most of my friends who identify as male, like know someone who, even if they didn't experience it. And like, we often talk about these discriminatory actions as like against women, and that is far more common, but there are plenty of men that are also discriminated against, right? And especially, once we're talking about these like scientific organizations, and like it's all about power, right? And like it's just about like getting ahead and getting power, right? So a man can be victim to someone trying to do that just as much as a woman, I think the bigger thing is that well, what the data actually shows is that men are more likely to be bullied and like harmed by their peers rather than their superiors. And so there's often a little bit less of a power dynamic in the harassment and bullying, but it's just as harmful, right? Like, even if we're not someone who grew up being bullied, and I was really grateful, like I didn't, I was like a science geek, so I wasn't like Miss Popular, but like I didn't have like really like bad, like kids making fun of me or anything like that, but all of us have experienced not feeling welcome. And all of us have felt like on the outside. And I think it's important to think about those feelings when we think about these structures, because the structures were essentially made to make us feel that way. Right. And so I think just like, I think it's really just helpful to know that it's not a personal thing, right? It's actually like a systematic thing. At least for me, that helps. I'm like, it's not that something, I didn't do anything wrong. I just like was born in this body that doesn't conform with science.
No, yeah, thank you so much for that. Very insightful. I feel like I personally haven't experienced it much yet. Thankfully, I'm very grateful for that. Just because in a university or college setting, I feel like you can take whatever classes you want to take. It's mostly like pretty accessible, that kind of thing. But then I think there are definitely I'm assuming there's most likely a shift when people like get out of like either undergrad and go into grad school, or like with your PhD, like you were saying, or going into the workforce. There's probably more of that divide there, or more of this kind of stuff happening. So it was helpful to hear.
Yeah, I definitely didn't feel it in undergrad, but that doesn't mean it wasn't happening, right? Like I just feel like I was, maybe because I was like lucky or in a great space, or
Yeah, definitely. So we have one more question for you. I'm going to pass it to Matthew to ask.
Okay.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of your most recent research, as you sort of mentioned, focus on inequalities in STEM. And sort of wondering what specific actions people looking into going into the environmental sciences can take to make the scientific field more inclusive and welcoming?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and I wish I had like an awesome answer for you. I think that there's a lot of things that we can do, especially at the like sort of space that all of us are existing in right now, right? Sort of like late high school into college, and because you're in a college too, right, Matthew?
No, I'm in high school.
You're in a high school. Okay, well, perfect then, right? So like, I went to a public high school, right? A good public high school, but like a public high school. And then I went to a private college, and at least when I started college, Emma, you can tell me what you think about this. Like, I met a lot of people who came from backgrounds that were way different than me, or actually appeared similar, but actually, as it turns out, their lives were really, really different than me, right? And she's nodding along. So I feel like so I think part of it is, and like, that's not because they're a better human than you, right? Like, I remember when I started college, basically, we did not have the term FOMO yet, but it was like serious FOMO. Like, what? I'm sorry, what? When I started grad school, it was like, I'm sorry, all these people did what in undergrad? Like, I mean, so I feel like that's just sort of constantly going to be how it is. And I think that acknowledging, just like recognizing that feeling and being like, I haven't murdered anyone. I haven't done anything really bad, right? Like, why did I not have access to that? Well, because as it turns out, a lot of it has to do with like luck and our zip code and like what privilege we were born into and like all of these things. Not to say that those are bad things, right? It's just like, well, it would be nice if our healthcare wasn't determined by where we were born, but not to say that like we can change that system. My point is that when we're teaching and when we're learning in these communities together, if we could all remember that everyone comes from like a different background, and that doesn't make them better or worse. It just means that they had different opportunities. And I think recognizing that differential access and trying to correct that as early as possible, whether that's through like enrichment bridge programs. So like my guess is that Williams, Colorado College had one. Like they have like often they're even called bridge, but they're like programs for kids coming out of schools that are like usually in like poor socioeconomic conditions, or they don't have AAP or advanced classes or what have you. And so it's just like gives you, I mean, it's like the opposite of Hotchkiss, which is like a preparatory college or preparatory high school for college, right? So high school is not, in fact, only to get you into college, right? So lots of people don't have, I mean, being here for almost a year now, I'm like, oh, this is why all those kids knew so much more than me when I started. Like, you know, I mean, I just think about it, and even just about like living on their own, you know, in a dorm. Like I'd never done that, you know, like I knew how to do laundry. So I never had like the all pink laundry fiasco freshman year or first year of college, but a lot of people did, you know, and but like if you think about all of those pieces together, right, like maybe in high school you like were a really good dancer, so you did dance, but now you're at a university and you can like take all of these different things, right? You have access to so many more resources, but you can't do everything, right? So like sometimes it's also about like figuring out how to like balance when you get into a new environment where like you like almost want to like feast on all the resources, right? So I don't know, just like thinking about how to acknowledge like differential like paths or days, right? I mean, all of us know what it's like to like have to go to class or perform on a day where we like would rather stay in bed, you know? And like if you sort of interact with people and like remember that this could be that day that they didn't want to get out of bed. I feel like whether that's you're teaching them, interacting with them, playing a sport with them, whatever, like it like reminds us to give people grace, right? And we'll be nicer to them, and like we'll be able to learn from them, you know, and they'll be able to learn from us because we've given them the space that they potentially need, right? To sort of exist in the world that day.
No, yeah, for sure. And I can definitely Williams definitely aligns with a lot of the stuff that you're saying. I know we do have a program for incoming freshmen where like people who are admitted to Williams who come from like low income or like more like minority backgrounds, they're invited to do like paid research over the summer going into their freshman fall. So I think a lot of like upper education, they're trying to institute programs like that now to kind of bring those people into these spaces and make them feel more included even right before they come in. And in a way, it's helping them like adapt and get into those spaces like a little bit ahead of other people, which has been very valuable. So the people I've talked to who have done it, it's been a very, very valuable experience to them. But I think you're totally right, just being totally open and recognizing these differences that we all have, but not letting that really like separate us or mean that like we're shoved into different spaces is a really like important thing to have in mind. I think just raising more awareness and educating people about that more in general is something that needs to be more widespread.
Yeah, I mean, all of us like know what it's like to like know what's going on in class and also not know what's going on in class, right? And like we're so appreciative to the peer who's willing to like explain a problem after class, right? And so I just always like tell my students, I'm like, think about how much better you understand something after you've explained it to someone else. So like not only are you being nice to them, you're actually helping your own learning when you like explain concepts to your peers. So I mean, I think that, you know, we're all going to be better at different things, right? And so there's no reason to like fault each other for like learning at different rates or like having different information in our brains.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Sorry, Matthew, did you have anything else to add?
No, but this was super interesting, and really want to thank you for taking the time. I'm sure that you're really busy, so thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I know that I learned a lot. Like, as I mentioned at the beginning, I really hadn't heard about like a lack of inclusion in the scientific field, which is weird because both of my parents sort of work in that area. And I really haven't heard about it. So it's really great to like gain more insight into that because it definitely seems like it's a really big issue that has to be addressed because like I can imagine that if people were included, the amount of good that could come out of science would be so much better, and it would be much more. So yeah, it definitely is a big issue.
Yeah, you're completely 100% right. Like everything you just said, Matt. Like all of that is correct. So, and there's like papers that show, right, that like more diverse teams lead to like more novel solutions, right? Just because like, right, even if we just think about it as life experience, if we're all trained differently, right, and we all have different lives and we bring all of that to the table, that like random story that, so and so made you think of, then like leads to an idea that I mean, that's just, all of us have that experience of like that ping pong sort of conversation, and we know that if you have like yet another surface to ricochet off of, you can like get another sort of level of creativity in there.
No, yeah, for sure. Are there any last minute questions that you had for us now that we've asked you some?
No, but this is so great. I admittedly hadn't heard of Teddy, but yeah.